Thanks very much, Rees. There was no need for stern looks. I wasn't giving stern looks. So I'm conscious of time, and we do have a reception, so you'll have an opportunity to engage directly with the panelists and with each other. Now, I have a zillion questions I'd like to ask the panel, but I think given I look out in this room and I see a tremendous amount of expertise and knowledge and engagement here, so I'd actually like to give the floor over to the room. Now, Raphael has a microphone. What I'd like to suggest, given that we have a limited amount of time left, Raph, is that you maybe collect, say, a few questions, and then we'll get some comments back from the panelists, so more than one person gets a chance to ask a question. And if nobody jumps in, I will jump in with questions, be assured. Yeah, so we've got some here.
Thank you. It was all very interesting. And the one word I didn't hear was trust. And some of the interventions have talked about how the institutions such as the UN may not be adequate in terms of addressing these problems. About 20 years ago, a Canadian researcher talked about the decline of deference, and this has been going on since then. So in your estimation, I address this to the entire panel, is part of the problem that maybe that institutions are losing the trust of the population while technology is gaining it? And I'm thinking about fake news. People distrust the media, but they trust what they hear from their friends on Facebook. So this whole question of where trust is now residing and what impact it's having on the knowledge economy is something I'd really like someone on the panel maybe to address, or more than one.
Okay, great. Hold that thought.
Thanks very much for a very interesting panel discussion. I have a question that's maybe a little sensitive, given we're in a university, but I like the idea that our academics get reward, of course, for publishing, but I think that the publishing is seen as too narrow, as in you publish in scholarly journals, but like you're going to share knowledge. How do you share that knowledge beyond writing to other academics? For example, in business publications, typically, about 4 or 5 people read a business published paper by another academic, but they don't read them in the business community at all. So how can this be? There's a need to change the reward system, and there's also a need to look at possibly a different way of outreach on the part of sharing the knowledge that's produced at universities and by academics. My question.
Great. Thank you, Peter. One down at the end here from April.
Thanks. My question actually dovetails really nicely with the 2 previous questions, and it's about access. So I think certainly I've seen a growth in the number of people that participate in the Global Knowledge Society, and I'm wondering, I wanted to get the panelists' perspective on whether we're seeing increased polarization, or it's just that we're having a lot of more representation of new voices, and that's causing people to feel that the discourse is more polarized. And I'm also hoping to get their views on who has access to this Global Knowledge Society and how do we ensure people that want to be involved are.
Great. So questions around trust, incentive structures in universities, engagement and access, and then maybe one more here or 2 more here, and then we'll go get some thoughts from the panel.
Yeah, thanks. I think everybody's thinking the same thing I am, because my thoughts are similar. Stephen Walt, the political scientist yesterday wrote an article saying that the liberal international order that we're now somewhat nostalgic for wasn't really that great to begin with. We're with populism, autocracy, misinformation, all the rest of it. This is the kind of discontents of those who were excluded from the liberal international order that, again, we're now seem to be somewhat nostalgic for, given what's going on. Could you not say that the promise of the Global Knowledge Society is possibly in peril because it didn't deliver enough to the same type of people that were excluded from the liberal international order?
Great. Then one final question, and then some thoughts from panelists.
One of the Paleolithic attributes of humans is that we by nature are tribal. And in a radical thought, we might suggest that this global knowledge society is actually exacerbating the hardening of the tribal lines. And that's the polarization phenomenon that occurs, and whether it's political, religious, societal, economic based. In a solution space, just as the kind of how you approach education, maybe a look at migration, and not just physical migration, but also career migration, to give people the opportunity to experience other experiences could be an enormously important enabler for softening up the tribal lines, which for some reason today seem to be particularly hardening.
Interesting. So each of the panelists has a microphone. Who would like to jump in first, recognizing we don't have a whole lot of time left. So maybe a few brief... Okay, yeah, terrific.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the last presentation, because I've seen in many countries, and at UNESCO here in Canada or in Paris and even in Brussels, I'm a great believer in the youth. So we have to involve youth people in our meeting and everywhere. And I think at UNESCO in Paris, there is a lot of work to involve youth. At the Canadian Commission also, we have with us somebody who did a lot of work to involve youth with the Canadian Commission, to involve them in our meeting, involve them in the discussion, involve them in the project, not having them only sitting at one table and singing for us, like we used to do some time ago. So that's a very important thing. The other thing is, actually, I think we're going through a distrust period at the international level. Like, I've chaired the International Bioethics Committee, who did the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. And some people have told me, now you would not be able to do that, because I had people sitting on my committee who were coming from Jordan, were coming from Israel, Syria, Africa, whatever. And I think that now the international tension that is out there is basically endangering that kind of mechanism. Even yesterday, somebody wrote a paper saying, I'm not sure that the Universal Declaration on Human Rights we would be able to do it today. So there are all those things, but I would like also just to mention quickly the PK survey that was done by the OECD. When I was in Paris, I did a lot of work with Finland, who came first on that. And this PK, it was I've seen a lot of survey done in adult education, lifelong learning, and whatever. I spent some part of my life on that. But this PK survey was looking not only at academic diplomation of people, but at their ability to use what they've learned. So it's fairly different from a lot of things that I have seen. And in Finland, they are putting a lot of emphasis on training the teacher, and they refuse 50% of the inscription of teachers. It's not the case in Canada. People who want to become teacher because they are well recognized, they get a lot of support and everything from the country, and they have a good relationship with their union too. So there are many factors that are at play that could help us rebuild the trust. But I think it's a lot of work. And the point I made about the ambassador and the people who come only for meetings, executive committee or general assembly, often I think that there is a disconnect about all that work that is being done. They come with briefing book. They don't know what they're talking about very often. So I think there is a lot of space for scientists to talk to them, to educate ministers, to educate the decision makers, because often, our political agenda is 4 years. I've worked with about 16 ministers. The first year, they're trying to find the washroom. The second year, they have some ideas, and you have to push these ideas. And the third year, they start talking about the next election. So I think that for scientists to come and talk with ministers when they have the budget and when they have the money, and to be able to explain what they want to do in 10 minutes. Because if scientists talk for half an hour, the minister would say, I don't want to see that guy again. So it's very important. You have the political agenda, you have the scientific agenda, and you have the sort of international agenda. So all these things don't always fit well together. So there's a lot of work that can be done there. Because often I go to meeting, whatever, and people are talking, it's all people who are converted. But we have to send our stuff, our report and everything. You have to send them to ministry. Maybe you will receive an accusé de réception, or maybe they will get interested in what you're doing. So there is a very big disconnect there, I think.
Errol and then Paul.
Yeah, I'm going to try and address both. Sorry.
No, let's
do this. Am I? It's okay.
Yep.
I'm going to address both the trust and the liberal international order at the same time. I'll try. But there's interesting research coming out of what's driving the fake news, the lack of trust, etc. And it really points out that we cannot stay in our individual disciplinary silos if we really want to find out what's going on. Because some are now saying that part of the dismantling of trust is due to the impact of social media, where people are basically staying in their echo chambers within their own views. I mean, I try and avoid that myself in the social media phase. In addition to that, there's another economic dimension to that, where the link between what they feel in their daily lives is being reinforced by what they hear on the social media platforms and other places, which ties in a way with the liberal international order. One of the reasons why I think you're dead on is the reason for populism in many respects goes back, way back to Reagan and Thatcher, who basically came up with this idea that the way to save the world is the so-called Washington Consensus, where all you need is some basic fundamental deregulation, get the companies to go and explore the world and rape and pillage around the world, come back, and the rise of the god of capitalism. Now, what's really interesting about that, both in this area too, the silos are demanding that people start talking to each other. I said I wish I had more time to talk about the impact of economics as being one of the contributors to the breakup of trust and indeed what we see now is the rise of globalism, because Thomas Piketty, I don't know if any of you have come across his work, has pointed out that at the root cause of much of what we now see in terms of the rise of populism is the fact that the god is capital. And unless you have it, you're a winner. If you don't have it, you're going to be a loser for the rest of your life. It's going to affect your job prospects, etc. So one of the reasons why I like to link these two is actually ties in with my statement in my presentation that none of the solutions to what I said and what many of the people here have said in terms of the challenges will be rectified in the long term unless we start breaking out of our individual silos and understand there is multi-dimensional aspects to every single problem in science, and both the social sciences and the physical sciences too. And if we don't understand it, we're just going to drive deeper and deeper into exactly what's happening in the world. Great.
Paul? And then a final word from each of our other panelists, and we can then all get to the reception.
Thanks for the comments. Real quick, Rick Mercer says ranting is good for you, so I'm just going to go into a little rant here. But the notion that the research community is going to solve society's problems and the global, however you want to define it, is to say the least a bit misguided. I mean, it is not a one-way street. I mean, the research community sometimes can be its own worst enemy. And it does need to understand, not just educating too, but understanding how political systems actually work, or don't, as the case may be, wherever it is they are. And so for me, the research community has to spend a lot more time thinking about how they deliver a message is important. Trust is important. But it also means when you start babbling on about your research work and make it some sort of one-way street, the audience is just not going to listen. So this is why, for example, we have a nice example in this country right now of an experiment called the MyTax Science Policy Fellowships, to try to not just drop our fantastic neuroscientists into various government departments, but so that they can also understand how this strange thing called parliament and senates and decision-making actually work. That is just as important if you're going to get the delivery of your messages through. I'll shut
Dan,
up.
it sounds like that's a great place for you to jump in, given your comments and your presentation.
Yeah, no, I want to jump in just quickly on the publishing aspect. That I think there's a great sort of mini example of the complexities of of change. Because I mean, we think in terms of open access as a great example, right? But when it comes to publishing and stuff, whether, you know, on the one hand, we're encouraged, academics, to mobilize our knowledge more. Go give TED Talks, participate in these sorts of panels, you know, and, you know, but God forbid you publish in open access. Because institutionally, open access publishing, for example, is still not recognized. People see it as being detrimental. Likewise, a lot of knowledge mobilization activities outside of publishing in your classic sort of proprietary journal things is seen as a risk of holding back. So I think it's part of example to say in terms of needing to look in terms of where the opportunities and constraints are, because what we need, I think part of the answer is indeed sort of facilitating a sea change in terms of evaluation of academics as they progress through their careers, of which publishing is a very important part of it. But until that time that we can start to recognize the value of things outside of sort of the classic model, we're up against a bit of a rock.
Christine, did you want to offer some thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I guess I'm in government relations, so I tend to hear everything through an advocacy lens, and I'm just hearing my advocacy asks reinforced here so nicely. Well, because two of them, I think the trust thing is just bang on in terms of you don't trust what you don't understand. You don't trust people you don't know. And several people have talked about the importance of moving around, moving around not only physically in the world, getting to know other cultures. I think Rees was the first one who started that, but also moving around in a disciplinary sense. And I work in the college sector. We're working very closely with Universities Canada on advocating for international mobility programs for Canadian students. Many other countries are investing heavily in making sure that their students in post-secondary have an opportunity, even at the undergrad level, to have it could be a study term abroad, but it also can be 2 weeks abroad. I just spent an evening at Centennial College last week. There was a Brazilian night in the restaurant, their culinary program. And it was,
we have a Brazilian among us, so that's why we're all looking at
a group of 12 students from 6 different programs had gone down and spent 2 weeks in Brazil. One were in marketing and media, one was in the culinary program, and they brought all of that back. They interacted with each other. They did a community service project. They brought the recipes back and cooked a Brazilian night recipe. This was life-changing for them. And interestingly, many of them are international students. Many of them come from the Punjab, and they're off to Brazil to work on a coffee plantation and show their stuff. So it's just, I think that's really important. And on the academic publishing, again, I look at it through a college lens. We don't do fundamental research at all. We certainly don't publish a lot of academic papers, but what we do is try to solve problems. So the applied research, and those people who work in the college applied research offices are highly trained people, PhDs, but they start with a problem and then work back into the academy to pull out what it is. So, you know, in addition to open access and other ways of getting academic knowledge out there in different ways, I think there's also a role for intermediaries to start with the problem and work back in.
Rees, last word to you.
I think I'll take on this comment from April about access and both who are the voices and who has access to the voices. I think this is very interesting, and it's a really hard problem. Certainly in all the international organizations that I've been fortunate to be involved with, like the Global Young Academy, this is an issue we confront very directly because hosting a meeting in wherever, Canada, Germany, or even South Africa or anywhere, is relatively easy for us to get there, but it's not so easy for people from, say, Bangladesh to get there. A friend and colleague from Uganda posted an amazing screed about the challenges associated with getting a visa to go to Japan recently. Kondina Shawarma, so I can send that to you. So I think there's some real important issues. I'm encouraged, modestly encouraged by some movement here in this country, in particular this university, and I say very modestly encouraged because now international students at the PhD level pay Canadian tuition fees rather than the 3 or 4 times the tuition fee that was associated with international students. As a result, I'm taking on 2 international students, one from India and one from Colombia. Thankfully, I think that will, these are some small steps towards breaking down some of these barriers. That may not be specifically, April, what you had in mind, but I think there's an open conversation there, or an opportunity for a further conversation about this issue around access and who that global knowledge is benefits, who it's for, and who uses it. But I'll end there and save it for the reception.
Terrific. That's great. So just a few words of thanks before we move into reception. I think first and foremost, a big thank you to the panel for sharing their perspectives and thoughts and time with us today. Please join me in thanking the panel. And none of this would have been possible without two extraordinary staff members at the Institute, the first of which is Dr. Marissa Beck. Marissa, if you'd like to, who organized the panel, developed so here's a group of people, come up with a theme. She did an absolutely extraordinary job, and thank you so much, Marissa. And then none of this would have been possible if it weren't for Raphael Desordi, our comms and event manager extraordinaire. Thank you, Raphael. And finally, thank you to all of you. We hope you will stay and join us for the reception and have an opportunity to mingle informally with each other and the panelists.